Hi, my name is Purani. Now let's discuss Pavlov's learning theory of conditioning. It is for teaching learning course amid digital teaching psychology. Pavlov's Pavlov conducted the experiment dog. Like many great scientific Pavlov- Pavlovian conditioning, classical conditioning, was discovered accidentally. Ivan Petrovich Pavlov, born in 1849 and passed away 1936, was a physiologist, not a psychologist. He is a setup for his experiment, a device to count the drop of saliva, revolving drum for recording response, observation screen, tube for collection of the saliva in the container of the meat powder. During 1890s, Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov was researching salivation in the dogs in response to being fed. This physiologist was working on the digestion of the food. He inserted a small test tube into the cheek of each dog to measure saliva when the dogs were fed with the powder made from meat. Pavlov predicted the dogs would salivate in response to the food placed in front of them, but he noticed that his dog would begin to salivate whenever they heard the footsteps of his assistant, who was bringing them the food. When Pavlov discovered that any object or the event which dogs learn to associate with the food, such as the lab assistants, trigger the same response, he realized that he had made an important scientific discovery. Accordingly, he devoted the rest of his career to studying this type of the learning. After conducting that experiment, he proposed a learning theory of conditioning. This is called Pavlov's learning theory of conditioning. Pavlov's in 1902 started from the idea that there are some things that dog does not need to learn. For example, dogs don't learn to salivate whenever they see food. This reflex is hardwired into the dog. That is before conditioning. Food response is salivation. That is unconditional stimulus, unconditioned response. In behaviorist terms, food is unconditioned stimulus and salivation is unconditioned response. Stimulus response connection that require no learning. Unconditioned stimulus is here food. Unconditioned response is salivate. In this experiment, Pavlov used metronome as he is a neutral stimulus. By itself, metronome did not elicit a response from the dogs. Neutral stimulus is bell. Whenever you ring a bell, it will not salivate. Whenever the food is brought, the dogs salivate. Here, the ringing bell is a neutral stimulus during condition. Next, Pavlov began conditioning procedure, whereby clicking metronome was introduced just before the gave food to his dogs. They started ringing a bell before giving the food tray to the dog. After a number of repeats or trials of this procedure, he presented the metronome on its own. After a number of days, every day, 2-3 times whenever they give food, they ring a bell, then give food to the dog. After many days of this practice, as you might expect, sound of clicking metronome on its own now causes increase in the salivation. Ringing bell itself before giving the food tray, before seeing the food, dogs started salivating whenever the bell rang. This is conditioned stimulate. After conditioning, after a few days of this practice, uh, it is a conditioned stimulus, that is ringing bell. Then conditioned response is salivation. Dog understood that whenever the ring bells, food is given to it. So the dog has learned an association between the bell and the food, and a new behavior had been learned because this response was learned or conditioned. It is called conditioned response and also known as the Pavlovian response. The neutral stimulus has become conditioned stimulus. So how can we apply this Conditioning in the classroom. How if some children are bullying one child class, then child associate that bullying to the school. Whenever you say him, when the parents tell him, let's go to the school, when they start dropping him to the school, he start crying because the fear of bullying. The child associates the fear of bullying with the name of the school. This is how in the classroom this Pavlovian conditional theory is applied. Pavlov found that for associations to be made, the two stimuli had to be represented. Stimuli are here, ringing bell and the foot should be close together, such as a bell. He called this a law of temporal contingency. It is temporary. If the time between conditioned stimulus, if you practicing ringing bell whenever you want and then give the food after a long time gap, then it becomes unconditional stimulus. Food is too great, then learning will not occur. Time gap should time gap between ringing bell and giving food should be simultaneous. End of this Pavlov's learning theory of conditioning. Thank you very much for watching my channel. Please